Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Let's discuss episode 2 of Hard Knocks, which aired Tuesday night on HBO, and lots of interesting things revealed, or at least hinted at as we watched the second episode of the 5-part series. Here to help me break all of it down and give us his impressions, his thoughts, his Big Blue Views, Tony DelGenio. Morning, Tony. How are you?
Good morning, Ed. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm good. All right, Tony. We have to start with the most serious, most critical question of the day. What's your 40 time?
Oh, under 7 seconds, right?
Oh, no. I mean, 7
40 what?
hours.
40 what? 40 inches?
Oh, yeah. I hear you. Mine's about a week and a half. Brian
Yeah,
Daboll thinking he could run 7 seconds, maybe from the 20. I don't know.
right, right. I
But
think the question for me is how many yards I'd be able to go before I'd pull a muscle.
that could be true too. The question for me is how many yards of a head start would I need to beat Xavier Worthy in a 40?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I could beat him from the 30,
Oh, yeah. I mean, he
but
was flying that day.
yeah, but that
Very
that was that was a that was a pretty hilarious exchange from Brian Daboll. But
yeah.
on a serious note, Tony, some interesting things revealed in the discussions last night about Malik Neighbors, Brian Burns, and at the end Saquon Barkley. Let's start with the Neighbors stuff. It was clear from the very beginning of the excuse me, it stinks having a summer cold, but clear from the beginning of the episode that the Giants had some concerns about Malik Neighbors, about the big personality, and all of that. They talked about it a lot. And it's clear they did an awful lot of work to become comfortable with Neighbors before they decided to select him number 6. Your thoughts on some of the Neighbors discussion?
Yeah, so I think the fascinating part about all of that, I mean, and I love, I think these interviews with the draft prospects are just gold. I just love seeing them for a variety of reasons. But uh, when you look at the ones that they showed last night, well, Marvin Harrison Jr. was a moot point. He was gone anyway, and so kind of forget about that. But uh, they obviously liked Odunze.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody I think seems to love Odunze, and what a great guy he is, as well as what a great football player he seems to be. And they had the chance to take Odunze, and they still took Neighbors. And so, what I took from that is that what you heard at the very beginning of last night's episode, which was Dable spending the day watching Neighbors tape, and he obviously was extremely impressed with Neighbors. And I guess what they're saying is that he gives them something that they don't have, and something that they haven't had for a long time on this team. And yeah, the concerns were there with his personality, and he even admitted during the interview that if he doesn't get the targets early, he's not going to be happy if he doesn't get the targets early, and things like that, right? On the other hand, he doesn't come across to me anyway, as a bad guy. I mean, he seemed fine, during that interview. He didn't seem to be the some kind of uber personality that was just going to be a headache from day one. He didn't strike me, for example, as having the same personality that OBJ does. Okay, there's that element though of the alpha wide receiver who wants his targets, right? And uh, I guess their attitude about that is, well, you kind of want that attitude in your wide receiver one, right? You want the guy
Right.
who wants the targets, who thinks he's the guy and can show it on the field. And so in the end, I think they make themselves comfortable with the idea. As Brandon Brown said, and the term choir boy maybe wasn't quite appropriate for what they were talking about, because they weren't talking about these players getting into any kind of trouble or anything like that. They were just talking about them complaining, if they don't get the ball to them enough. And Brandon Brown is saying, well, how many times have you seen one of these, number one great wide receivers who isn't a choir boy? Well, Roma Dunze looks like he might be a choir boy, right? But they still
Mhm.
chose to take Neighbors, and I think it all comes down to the fact that they're just so impressed with what they saw on film.
Absolutely. I thought, Brandon Brown, that was kind of an impressive thing that he said in that conversation with Joe Shane. With some of these great players at these positions, he was saying wide receiver, cornerback, pass rusher, there's a certain amount of personality that you just have to deal with if you're going to get, the top tier guys. And I thought it was very interesting that Joe Shane admitted that he had discussed Neighbors with Daniel Jones. I thought that was interesting that they had talked about Neighbors. And, because Brandon Brown raised the point, if we're going to draft a guy like this, we have to have a quarterback who can handle that personality, who can handle, the guy ranting once in a while if the ball goes somewhere else when he thinks it should have gone to him. Because I think the Giants recognize that's going to happen sometimes. It just is. Jeremy Shockey used to do that kind of stuff. He used to rant and rave all the time, if the ball didn't come his way when he thought it should. Beckham did that. Stephon Diggs finally, got himself out of Buffalo because, in large part, because I don't think he thought he was getting the ball often enough over the last couple of years. But that's what you deal with, I think, when you deal with wide receivers who think they're better than the guys across from them. They think the ball should go to them every time. And I did think it was interesting, Daniel Jones, who's a quiet guy, not demonstrative, under a lot of pressure this year, for his own job. I thought it was interesting that that Shane said he had talked to Jones about Neighbors, and that Jones loved the kid.
Yeah, and to go back to one other thing that you mentioned, Stephon Diggs. Yeah, so obviously Brian Daboll has experience with Stephon Diggs, right? And
Mhm.
Stephon Diggs can be a prima donna, getting the ball from Josh Allen, who certainly isn't afraid to fling it downfield, right?
Right, he's an established top 5 quarterback.
Right.
So he's gonna stand his ground if he
Yeah.
throws the ball somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. And so, my impression is, look, Dable thinks, look, I've seen these types of players. I know what they're like. I've dealt with them. You still have to have the guy on the field who's going to break the game open for you.
Mhm,
And if you're going to avoid that personality, then you're probably not going to get that guy who's going to break the game open for you. And if we have a chance to get him, we should probably go get him, right? And
mhm,
and I think that's the way it turned out. But it did interest me, though, that
mhm.
they, along with seemingly everyone else, was as impressed as they were with Odunze. Yet Odunze dropped in the draft so that the Bears could pick him up.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Hannah Burnett, the area scout who was responsible for Odunze, specifically used smart, tough, and dependable in her discussion of Odunze. I think I'm very curious. We will never know what might have happened. I'm very curious to know what the Giants might have done had the draft played out a little bit differently, and had they not been able to get the guys who seemed to be their two top targets. At quarterback, we know it was Drake May, and at wide receiver, we know, it ended up being Malik Neighbors. I'm really curious. I'd love to know what they might have done if either of those guys were there. Would they have have taken a Dunze? Would they have traded out of that spot? Would they have taken the JJ McCarthy swing? If Neighbors was already gone? I wonder, Joe Shane will never tell us, but I wonder what they would have done.
Yeah, and the one person you didn't see last night on the show was Joe Alt, and there had been rumors about them, possibly wanting to go that route. Even after the draft, you were hearing that, but there was like not a word about that. And so I wonder whether that was even under consideration. But obviously with the Neighbors versus Adunze thing, they had the chance for both. And
Right.
again, the only one that was ruled out was Marvin Harrison, who I'm sure many Giants fans chuckled when they were interviewing him and they're showing the play where Harrison gets underthrown by the quarterback last year at Ohio State. And they want to know how he reacts to that and stuff like that. I'm sure Giants fans are going, yeah, he comes to the Giants, probably going to get a lot of passes like that, but
Yeah.
where it's right. So I found all of that stuff very amusing, actually, and but informative too. What do you actually want to know from these guys, and what types of responses are you looking to see from them? I found all of that stuff fascinating.
Yeah, I also found, we talked a little bit about Brian Daboll and his 7-second 40-yard dash, with the plate of chicken wings on the end there. But I loved Joe Shane's reaction when Daboll was talking to Malik Neighbors and talking about harnessing his emotions, talking about, I lose my cool too, or whatever, however he said it. But you need to be able to harness that in a good way. And I just love Shane's reaction with the little smile and just sort of, turning around and kind of slapping Daboll on the shoulder. Like seriously, Dabes, I mean, it's like so telling in terms of the Giants knowing, that Daboll's a powder keg sometimes too.
Yeah, and well, and just to take it even another step, when I was a kid, we we used to get back at someone who insulted you about something, and we'd say to them, "Well, it takes one to know one," right? Well,
Hmm.
I'm thinking of Dable sitting there, and they're discussing with Neighbors about him controlling his emotions, and yeah, if there's anybody in that room who knows about the difficulty in controlling emotions, right?
Hmm.
Dable is the guy, and again, that may be another reason why they were willing to go that way, because Dable, maybe, who knows, but Dable behind closed doors, maybe says, look, I get it. I get it about guys who can't control their emotions, and I'm willing to deal with them because I understand where people like that are coming from. Who knows? But yeah, very interesting, right? That they have that discussion with Dable in the room.
Absolutely. And I did think it was interesting. Let's move um to a different topic, different section of the show. There was really not a whole lot of discussion of Saquon. There was a little bit, but not a whole lot of discussion of Saquon until the last 5 minutes of the show. And the last 5 minutes of the show closed with Saquon. And I thought the last sort of the last thing when Joe called Saquon, I thought I had two takeaways from that. I thought you could kind of tell from the flat sort of whatever tone of Saquon's voice that he was done with Shane, he was done with the Giants, he was going somewhere else. And you could kind of tell from from Shane, telling him that he loved him and telling him that the organization loves him and thanking him for everything that he had done. You could kind of tell that although Joe was trying to leave the door open and trying to say, come back and give us an opportunity to talk about whatever you find out there. I think Joe knew that Saquon was going somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think Joe Shane knew that he kind of wanted Saquon to go
He
somewhere.
wouldn't he wouldn't admit that to Ed Berry, Saquon's agent. He wouldn't admit that, but I do think he would have taken Saquon at his price, which wasn't a heck of a lot more, to be honest with you, than the Giants ended up paying Devin Singletary.
Mhm,
But he
mhm.
wasn't going to pay Saquon at Saquon's price.
Right, right, and from, Saquon's standpoint, I agree with you. The tone in his voice, I think, said it all, and most of what he said, if you just were to look at the transcript and not actually hear him saying it, most of it sounded like the door was still open for him returning, because he was saying, "I'll appreciate it," several times. But the one telling thing was after Shane says, go test the market, and when you get your best offer, come back to us, and we'll see what we can do, or something like that. And Saquon says, "Well, you know what I want."
Right.
And so
You
that
know
was
what I want, and the part of that was left unsaid was, you know what I want, and you haven't been willing to give it to me for 2 years.
Mhm. That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm done with you.
Right.
And, I mean, and he wouldn't say that last part, but just saying, "You know what I want," I think really kind of sums up the entire thing. And I think you have a situation where Shane, regardless of the specific number that they're talking about, deep down inside, Joe Shane wants a different kind of offense, because he subscribes to the modern view of NFL offense, in which things are dominated by the passing game, and he wants to try to build the Giants offense that relies on the passing game. And of course, there are then all of these questions that arise about whether they have a quarterback on the roster who can do that for them, and what will they have to do to get there if not. But I think he believes that that's the only way to really win in the NFL is with an offense that's dominated by the passing game. And so therefore, regardless of the specific player concerned, he's just not going to go too far in paying a running back, even after he learns that the salary cap is going to be about $10 million higher than he thought it was going to be at the very beginning of the episode. You see how pleasantly he surprised he was about that. But I think deep down, he's not looking to spend that extra $10 million to pay Saquon. He's looking at it to get a pass rusher or something else.
I do also think, although in episode 1, the Giants had Shane had talked about, and pro scouting director Chris Rossetti had talked about, it only takes one team out there to be willing to spend the money.
Yeah.
I do think that it was pretty clear that Joe Shane, looking at the market, although he said, "I'm not sure what the market is, what people will pay and all that." I do think it's pretty clear that Joe did not believe that anybody would blow the Giants out of the water
Hmm.
in making Barkley the kind of offer that the Eagles ultimately did. I think there were others in the Giants front office who, like Rossetti, and maybe a couple of others, but I think there were others who thought it was possible. I don't think Joe believed that there was a team that was going to absolutely blow the Giants out of the water, and I think he thought maybe in the end the Giants could sort of rely on Saquon's love for the organization to get him at their price.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that, and I think that is a mistake by Shane. That's something that Rossetti recognized in that first episode that Shane apparently did not recognize. And here's the thing about, I think, the fault in the thought process, and that is that while it may be true that in today's NFL you can't win without an offense that's dominated by the passing game, and so therefore you have to devote resources to that. If you actually look at the team that signed Saquon, then you realize that, well, that's a different kind of team that has a completely different approach to their budget. Uh, the Eagles have that explosive passing game, right? I mean,
Right.
they've got at least two wide receivers, certainly, who allow them to go up and down the field as much as they want. And Hertz is, regardless of how good you think Hertz is, he's a good enough quarterback to exploit those receivers. And certainly, they've had a good enough offensive line to give him the protection to do so. But what Howie Roseman does is to say, I don't care about the salary cap. I'm just going to push whatever costs I need to push down the line into void years, and I'm going to get the players I want. And so he does not, I believe, look at Saquon as the kind of necessary piece of the offense. He's just yet another option for them to add to that offense on the days when maybe the passing game is having a little bit of trouble. And he knows that with the quality offensive line he has, he can get good mileage out of Saquon as long as they can keep him on the field. And so he will do whatever he needs to do to put the Eagles in position to win the Super Bowl. Budget be damned, salary cap be damned. It's I'll just put all the money in void years. And if you don't subscribe to the void year philosophy, and the Giants don't really subscribe to that philosophy, they have very little money in void years, then you do have to worry about whether you're giving them $12.5 million a year. Howie Roseman doesn't have to worry about that because his whole concept of finances is very different. And you can say that's a good idea or a bad idea, but what Rossetti may have realized that Shane didn't realize is that the Eagles are the type of team who might be willing to pay that kind of money.
Tony, I wrote this earlier in the week. The thing of it is, for me, both teams made the right decision. Fact of the matter is, the Eagles are in a vastly different place than the New York Giants are. The Eagles are in a win now window with a young quarterback, with all of those pieces around them, with a somewhat aging defense. They're in that window of, if we're going to win a Super Bowl, it's going to be in the next couple of years. Whatever our budget is, and whatever, when we have to pay the piper 3 or 4 years from now, then we just deal with that pain and start over again. But the Giants are not in that place. So, paying that kind of money for Saquon would have been the wrong decision. Doing what the Eagles did was the right decision for them where they are now. And that's why, both teams, that's why Saquon's an Eagle today.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. What I think, as fans, we tend to look at trades and personnel moves of one kind or another as who won and who lost. But I think this is a situation that could very well wind up being both sides won, because Saquon at, say, $12.5 million a year was probably not the right move for the Giants at this point in their development, because they are not ready to win a Super Bowl yet. And while I think the offensive line is improved, I doubt that it's going to be a top 10 offensive line next year. The Eagles, on the other hand, are smack in the middle of their Super Bowl contention window, and they do still have a very good offensive line, even though Kelsey won't be there next year, and that's going to be an interesting thing to see how that affects the running game, for example. But they're the type of team that says, yeah, he could be that one thing that gets us over the hump against the best teams like Kansas City or whoever, right? And so I will not be surprised at all if Barkley has a great year with Philadelphia, a better year than he's had since his first year with the Giants. Um, Yet still, and therefore it will turn out to be a great decision for the Eagles. But it's still the right decision for the Giants, because he probably could not have that good a year with the Giants, given the rest of their offense and their offensive line. And the Giants even in my wildest dreams, I don't see the Giants contending for a Super Bowl this year. So I think
Yeah.
it's the right move on both sides.
Yep, Saquon could go rush for 2,500 yards next year, and he's not taking the Giants to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it. Tony, the other thing that came about, that I've talked about a lot at Big Blue View, that I've written about a lot at Big Blue View, is it was apparent. We talk about the Barkley decision, but we also talk about other decisions. It was apparent how the Giants were reallocating and rethinking the way that they spent their money. They didn't sign Saquon so that they could address the offensive line. They didn't make a big offer to Xavier McKinney because it was clear that they wanted to put their financial resources into adding a pass rusher, which is something that Shane Bowen asked for, as we saw in episode 1 of Hard Knocks. And, Bowen didn't care if it was an edge guy or an interior penetrator. And the two guys that the Giants were clearly after in terms of that pass rush were Brian Burns via trade or Christian Wilkins in free agency. It was clear they would have taken either one. But it was very clear, and we've talked about Joe Shane's vision, Brian Daboll's vision for how they want to spend their money, how they want to build this team. It was clear that that's where they wanted to spend whatever money they had. And yes, you're right. The bump in the cap, gave them the ability to go out and get Brian Burns.
Yeah, and I guess it's been obvious right from the start of this that they were interested in Brian Burns right off the bat. I thought we heard kind of two different views of Christian Wilkins in the two different episodes. In the first episode, you hear Rossetti kind of saying that, well, he's not really the game changing guy. Then in the second episode, you hear them talking seriously about going after Wilkins. Of course, whatever the truth about Christian Wilkins is, the one thing that I can say is, for that brief moment while they're discussing that, I'm imagining sitting down and watching the Giants defense with Christian Wilkins lining up next to Dexter Lawrence the way they did down at Clemson, saying, oh my God. imagine
Mm-hmm.
imagine that watching that every week, those two guys
Mm-hmm.
next to each other. That would have been one hell of a thing to see. But yeah, I think it's easy to understand though why they were more willing to give the big money to Burns. And Wilkins wound up getting a contract, I think something like $4 or $5 million a year higher than Dexter Lawrence's. He got that from Las Vegas, I believe. It's something like $27 million a year, or something like that. So I mean, wow, I wouldn't have wanted to pay him that much money.
No, the Giants wanted to pay Wilkins. They were talking about 22. And Wilkins ended up getting $110 million deal, over what, 4 years plus a void year. So, so he did get a massive, massive deal, which is more than the Giants thought that they would have to pay, to get him. So yeah, they probably, you can say, oh, you can go get Wilkins and not have to give up the draft picks that the Giants gave up. The problem is you're out there in free agency, and like we found with Saquon, you're out there in free agency and you're bidding against 31 other teams, and somebody's going to have deeper pockets than you are in a lot of these cases. And in the case of Brian Burns, all Joe Shane had to do was make an offer that his friend Dan Morgan, the GM in Carolina, was willing to take, and then be willing to swallow the cost of giving Brian Burns a long-term deal.
Yeah, and of course the other part of that for the Giants, and not just a matter of what in isolation they might have been willing to offer Wilkins. I think you absolutely cannot, right after you sign Dexter Lawrence to, I think it was $23 million a year that Dexter
Hmm.
Lawrence got, you can't then turn around and give another guy who's going to play right next to him at the same position $4 million a year more than Dexter Lawrence is getting, or else you're going to make Dexter Lawrence unhappy too, I think, right? And
Even though he and Wilkins are buddies, that's
that's
not going to make Dex happy.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so we agree with that.
And the other thing interesting about this pass rush thing, and this isn't finished, and hopefully, I would guess by next week they're going to be on to free agency, and that's going to be the focus of most of the discussion in next week's episode. But I'm interested to see how they finally get to the final deal that they made for Brian Burns, because now we've gone from week one where they're talking about, it started out that they wanted multiple first round picks last year to give Burns up, to it's going to take a first round pick plus to get Burns, and now this week they're talking about 2 seconds, right? And what they wound up with, of course, was a second and a fifth, and so I'm interested to see how they wind up getting down to the price they actually paid for Burns, which from that side of it was really not that much. The contract they gave him was a very big contract, but what they gave up
Yes.
to get him was really not all that much.
Right. Not nearly what was initially asked for. Tony, let's talk about one other thing. There was a lot of chatter around the draft about the Giants wanting to move up to number 3. And you know, we found out in this episode of Hard Knocks that that was absolutely on the table. That the Giants absolutely wanted to discuss, what it would take, and probably did at some point discuss what it would take with the Patriots to move up to number 3. So, that in this particular episode, Drake May and per se wasn't discussed as the target of moving up to number 3, but it's absolutely clear that was on the table, which it just confirms what we knew, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, and what we don't know yet is how serious their pursuit of moving up to number 3 is, and hopefully, again, we'll find that out. Maybe not next week, maybe probably the week after or the last episode. I'm not sure when they actually get to draft day, but yeah, I'm curious, and again, this is where I don't know how things work behind the scenes. Uh, Shane is obviously thinking about what to do about the quarterback position, and he seems to be kind of in this in between place where he believes in Jones, and he believes he did not get a fair shake last year, and that he's never had the team in front of him that he needs to actually show what he can do, and that the one time they gave him anything that approached that, he got the team to the playoffs and won a playoff game. So on the one hand, there at some level he believes in Daniel Jones, but at another level he's saying, we got to find out if he's the guy, and if he isn't, if we think he isn't the guy after this year, then we have to move on. He said that last week, and he also, of course, brought up the 3 injuries in 2 years, and he said several times in these episodes that they've got to protect themselves against the possibility of another injury, and they've got to have somebody to play quarterback for them. And so it's not clear yet exactly where in his mind, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's not clear exactly where in his mind he views the quarterback situation. Is it something that he really wants to do to move up to number 3 and will be willing to give up a tremendous amount to get there? Or is it just something that he wants to explore and, doing his due diligence, and are those talks going to ever heat up? Are they never going to go anywhere? That's what I'll be interested to see next week. And at the same time, I mean, it's interesting that you're seeing them interview all of the quarterback prospects that were being talked about. They didn't show Penix or Nix, but I and I guess this is just, I guess, the way HBO decides to edit these things. Uh, they show Caleb Williams, and they show them talking about the fact that Caleb Williams didn't want to talk to the press after in the second half of the season, after the season went south for USC, and they're talking about that in the context of being able to handle New York. And so that's the kind of one thing that they say about him, really, in that part. When they're interviewing Jaden Daniels, they're showing the part where Daboll tries to get Jaden Daniels to tell him, okay, I moved this guy here and this guy there. Now what's the play? And all Jaden Daniels can say is throw a touchdown, and Daboll has a nice answer to him. Les says, okay, that's a good answer. But I think he wanted something more specific from him on what to do in that situation. And then when they're talking to McCarthy, the only thing that they really show you about McCarthy is that McCarthy wasn't calling protections at Michigan. So I was interested that kind of 3 of the 4 quarterbacks they're showing kind of negative things that happened during the interview. Whereas with Drake May, they showed what looked like Drake May being able to
Yes.
give back to them
what they wanted,
the play that they
right.
want. So it seems like they're creating, with what they're deciding to show, they're creating a framework whereby you can believe that Drake May is the guy that they really want, because they're showing something positive about him.
Absolutely. Drake May gave them back the information that Daboll asked for. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that you could connect the dots from what the scouts gave in their initial reports. At the beginning of the episode, you could connect the dots back to the way Brian Daboll was questioning someone like Jaden Daniels. He was intentionally trying to confuse Jaden Daniels. He was trying to see how quickly Jaden Daniels could think on his feet and how quickly he could process. It's A, but 2 seconds later it's B. What's the deal? And I couldn't have kept up,
Mm-hmm.
But it was obvious he was trying to find out something. But, so we saw that sort of inside the organization kind of look, inside the process kind of look. And the other thing that was really interesting to me as a person who was in that Joe Schoen press conference at the NFL Scouting Combine. And I have a question for HBO. It's like, why wasn't my face included in those pictures of the media? Where was it? Come on, people, I was there. Come on, give me a little airtime. But besides that, I always knew that the kind of media preparation that we saw Joe Schoen go through with Dion Dargan, with Matty Harris, with Jen Conley Escalante, who were the 3 people shown in that video. I always knew that those things took place. I think when Brian Daboll walks to the podium every day, he's been prepped on the questions to expect. So he's thought about the answers that he's going to give already. But I thought that was and let's face it, we all know that they lie to us. All right. We know they lie to us. We know they don't tell us everything that they want us to know. They give us snippets of what we need. All right. They try not to give us the real story. We know that. Tony, it's a big game that we play. We ask the questions. We know we're not getting the 100% true answers. We know that. They're trying to give us enough of a little quote here and there that we can use for our stories. And we're all trying to get along because we have to deal with each other, week after week, year after year. And so you kind of play along to get along. But I found it interesting. The one thing that Joe admitted during his prep, and we saw it in other episodes, they knew darn well that they weren't going to franchise tag Saquon. They 100% knew they weren't going to franchise tag Saquon, but he sat there and he admitted, I'm not telling him that. I'm not telling him that the franchise tag's off the table.
Mhm.
So, and he didn't. He said the franchise tag is still a tool that we have and it's still in play.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but that's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. He's not supposed to tell us. He's not supposed to tell us exactly how this is going to play out.
Mhm.
But I found that whole, because that's sort of inside the front office, inside the relationship between the media and the coaching staff and the GM, and I got a kick out of it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think that stuff is fascinating. I mean, right, I think there's a couple things, right, that we've learned by now. So this is kind of become a joke on Twitter these days. But you know that when one of them says the expectation is, then whatever comes after it is probably a lie, right?
Mhm.
Right. And so the things they'll try to say that don't turn out to be true, but the rest of it is sort of difficult to parse when you're on the other side of things. And as you say, they're doing that purposely. There's no reason for them to show their hand, and that's something that Dave Gettleman never really learned. I mean, Dave Gettleman basically telegraphed to the entire NFL that he was going to pick Saquon Barkley in the 2018 draft with the number 2 pick, right? So Joe Shane doesn't do that with the media, and
No.
yeah, rightfully so. Why take away something that
Well,
can be an advantage for you?
absolutely. In terms of him standing at the podium in Indianapolis and saying that the franchise tag was off the table. Why would he do that? Why would he say it was off the table? Um, because that kind of telegraphs something to the rest of the league. So, there's that, and I think we all understand that. He can say it. We didn't have to believe it. We more or less had to write it, but you don't necessarily have to believe it. But that's just how the game is played. Anyway, Tony, quickly, any other thoughts? Anything you're really looking forward to next week?
Well, I'm very interested to see how the negotiations that led to acquiring Brian Burns actually got down to only a second and a fifth. I'm interested to, and I don't know whether we'll see anything about other free agents that they were trying to get and weren't able to get, where they and even, what are they thinking now about the remaining free agents out there? Were they seriously considering bringing in a veteran cornerback? I mean, a veteran cornerback of some stature, or
We know Joe Shane thought he could play corner with Brian Burns on the team.
that's right, that's right. And the only other thing I'll say about last night is that I was amused that they chose to show um, Sam Hartman at the combine for as long as they did on screen. But when they did and showed him, walking through and everything like that, and running and so on, I pointed to my wife and said, "That's the guy Joe Shane's grandmother likes." Yeah, so she was
That
very
was
interested to see that.
that was HBO's nod to Joe's grandma. So anyway, Tony, thank you very, very much for the time and the insight. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.